Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is on a multi-country tour of Europe as India and the EU move closer together economically and strategically at a time of increasing global uncertainty. His visit comes as European governments rethink trade, supply chains and security relationships following the Ukraine war, increasing tensions with China and growing concerns over economic dependency. Mr. Modi was in Norway on Monday following meetings in Sweden that focused on trade, technology, defence and investment cooperation. Speaking in Sweden on Sunday, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the bloc wants deeper investment ties with India.
Our next step must be to deliver an investment agreement. And this is the missing piece of the puzzle in our reinforced economic cooperation, especially in a world where supply chains are being reshaped and economic security challenges us as never before. Deepening our investment ties will help us to de-risk and to diversify.
So what's in it for India and what's in it for Europe? Richard Rosso is a senior advisor and holds the chair in India and Emerging Asia Economics at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. Welcome to DW, Richard. Let's start with the basics.
Thanks, Robin.
Is this India doing individual deals with individual European countries or with the EU as a bloc?
Well, it's a bit of both. Obviously, for signing a free trade agreement, the ability to negotiate directly with the European Union and capture most member states. Separately, India has negotiated agreements with a smaller EFTA group, as well as with the UK. So they managed to get agreements with all three blocs that basically make up the entire EU. So they've got coverage from toe to toe. But when it comes time to trying to lure specific investors to come in, to do roadshows, to try to get an understanding about the markets for products and sometimes raw materials, things like that, then you got to do a lot of individual work, as well as looking at defense and security cooperation. So a bit of both, and India kind of picks the pathway that's right for the different type of topic.
Okay, so it sounds like everyone is signed up to this. As this has got everyone's all the capitals, all the European capitals signed off. Okay, we're talking about 27 individual countries on one side and one on the other. So this next question gets a bit sort of vague. But what does each side have to gain from strengthening economic ties between India and Europe?
Well, I think for India, when they look at trying to connect stronger economically with the European Union, they want export markets for some of their labor-intensive products. They're also making a big push to try to be more productive in terms of high-tech industries. So if that comes to blossom, they like to make sure that they can export that as well. They want to attract foreign direct investment coming into the country, but also options for immigration. So those are some of the things that I think are in India's short list and wish list that you've seen articulated in the statements done so far across this trip. For the European Union, export market, obviously India now is the most populous country in the world and still growing at 6-7% per year. Growing amount of FDI out of India. And a lot of times, surprisingly, India's outbound FDI tends to look for developed markets.
FDI?
So Europe might be able to land increased FDI. And students, tech workers, as much as those students and tech workers aren't coming to the United States anymore because of concerns about closure of the U.S. market, you know, if Europe can tap into a lot of this great talent, students and tech workers that we're really trying to push away right now, all for the benefit of Europe. So I think both sides have things to gain.
Okay, and when we talk about FDI, we're talking about foreign direct investment. Yeah. Just thinking about potentially who might have much to lose, both India and the EU. They both have strong farming lobbies. Is this why this is a series of deals rather than a sort of trade deal between the bloc and India?
I think, and we see that as a major sticking point, too, in terms of the United States' ability to get our pending bilateral trade agreement across the finish line. You know, with a lot of countries, the United States and with Europe, farmers make up a small but vocal minority. In India, they still are just about the majority. A little over 40%, almost 45% of India's labor market is still in basic small-time agriculture. So the ability for a small farmer like that to get their product on a dirt road with no cold chain storage, get it to port, send it, is virtually impossible. I can't speak to Europe as much, but I know at least in India, the idea that a democratically elected leader can open up an agreement that might potentially flood the market with product that really is kind of subsistent living for a lot of farmers, very dangerous place. So I do think, yeah, trade agreements would have to carve out certain parts of agriculture that really touch on the lowest folks that have very little economic rungs below them.
All right, let's talk about the why then of why this is happening. Is this all about the turbulence and uncertainty being generated by this White House?
Yeah, I think that might be accelerating. We actually began to see India about 5 years ago. So about midway through Prime Minister Modi's second term in office, you began to see India moving away from protectionism as its major measures on trade and moving towards openness, reducing tariffs for capital goods and equipment you couldn't find locally, but also aggressively pursuing trade agreements. So while Europe is one of the more recent ones, you saw agreements with UAE, with Australia, and with others that came even before President Trump came to office. So I think India's tilt towards signing trade agreements, it does predate President Trump, but I suspect that concerns that India would have about losing their most important economic partner. The United States is the largest export market for goods, the largest export market for India's services, the largest source of foreign investment. So I suspect that probably is accelerating India's drive to latch down a number of these other pending trade agreements. So wasn't the creator, but it's the accelerant for sure.
Okay. Let's talk about the way India has played its geopolitical hand, which seemed to be going very well for it. It's constantly refused to pick a side, if I can put it that way. Delhi buys weapons from Russia while being a member of the Quad Strategic Forum with the US, Australia and Japan, while also being a founder member of the BRICS group of nations, which seeks to counter Western geopolitical and economic dominance. So how does this new set of deals with Europe fit into that?
Yeah, I think it really is about maintaining domestic commercial momentum by latching on trade partnerships with key partners. I think India still isn't quite sure where Europe stands, individual member nations stand, on whether they're going to be more confrontational about China. And India certainly does not want to be pinned down, as you rightly point out, in taking a call and trying to broker something between Russia and Ukraine. They'll raise their voice occasionally, but that's about as far as I think India's willing to go. And if India could take advantage of low-cost Russian oil and fertilizers and still buying a lot of weapons, particularly spares for the massive kit of Russian-made military equipment they already have, they don't want to be pinned down and being forced to do that. So I think with Europe, it really is pure play, more of a commercial. I think when you talk about strategic, some of the forums like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, you don't see a lot of tangible outcomes. The Quad had a lot more tangible outcomes, but even the Quad is under some question. We do have a Quad foreign ministers meeting that's going to take place in Delhi next week, but it seems to have been downgraded from a leaders summit, fewer working groups, and maybe a little bit less visibility on big things the Quad may be doing together. So I don't know that India's got a very strong strategic outlay in any direction at all right now. At least for a while, it had been, working with partners that are willing to stand up against China. But even that seems to be under question because of partner concerns right now.
Let's talk a bit more about China. We have Europe talking about de-risking from China, but not decoupling. We know that China and India have a somewhat fractious relationship. Do the two sides of this deal, India and Europe, do they have the same view of the risks that China poses?
I don't think they do quite yet. For India, it is something akin to a territorial, not quite existential, but at least a direct territorial risk, where you've already got disputed territory between the two. It's triggered just 6 years ago, conflict between the two, dozens of soldiers dying on both sides. Luckily, no shots fired, but still conflicts have erupted, and not just with India. China and Bhutan have a disputed border. There's been a military confrontation that it engaged in as well on Bhutan's behalf, since Bhutan is basically kind of a protector state. So for India, the threats along the border and the maritime domain, as the People's Liberation Army from China begins playing a more active role in the Indian Ocean, it's a day-to-day thing, both in terms of maritime and land. Europe doesn't have the day-to-day pressures quite the same way. But de-risking, because China has used commercial diplomacy as a tool, as a sanctions tool against other partners. So I think for Europe to at least find other partners for exports, to be able to attract goods that they buy from China, is a good and healthy thing. For India, it's a lot more security-oriented right now, and it's a day-to-day thing that's in their face every single afternoon.
Okay, so Europe clearly wants India to become a larger manufacturing and technology partner. But can India realistically emerge as a serious alternative to China at scale?
Yeah, right now, you still don't see nearly enough reform, particularly at the state level in India. States actually have a lot of control over the basic factors of production that'll make manufacturing work or not. Electricity, water, labor regulations, land, most of that's actually controlled not by Prime Minister Modi, but by state governments, the 28 states that actually define a lot of those features and characteristics. A couple of states have done pretty good reforms in those areas. Modi's home state of Gujarat, the state of Tamil Nadu in the East Coast. But you need more than just two states, I think, that are waking up every day and making the tough decisions that that can help to attract global supply chains. Because right now it's a bit of a race as robots and automation and artificial intelligence look to replace workers in industries that have so far been where robots have been kept out of. Is India going to be able to get the reforms in place to absorb some of that labor that they're creating right now before almost every industry, including areas like textiles and food processing, become mechanized? So that's the grand race. India's got to move really fast to make sure they don't lose out on that.
Finally, one of the prime ministers, one of the Indian prime minister's big missions has been to take his country into a position as a leading global power rather than just a sort of balancing one. Do partnerships like this suggest that India is moving towards the top tier geopolitically, or is this just about continuing that incremental progress?
It's probably maybe more of a recognition from India's trading partners that India is rising up to be a global power more than it is, India becoming a power itself. And I say that because, India is about to surpass both Germany and Japan to be the world's third largest economy. And if they maintain 6-7% growth rates, they'll be a $15 trillion economy mid-century. By the end of the century, they'll have double China's population. Today, it's still hard to make the case that India has a lot of influence on global affairs. They don't have much of a development budget. They don't have, it's not a huge market for other countries' exports necessarily. Probably the single biggest tool that they have is the diaspora, which for a lot of countries across Asia and the Middle East, and including North America, the diaspora is a critical component of a lot of our emerging technology research and such. But, I think when you're talking about India as a global power, they have aspirations, maybe not there today. But if you think India is going to maintain this growth rate by mid-century, if they shrug, they're going to have tremendous influence just outside their own region and across the world. So I think India's key partners are playing for the India of 2050, not just the India of today.
Fascinating analysis. Thank you for that. Richard Rosso from the Centre for Strategic and International Studies.